pass a call to the Canada Goose, and if I have any luck, there may be one come up from the water here before long. His name is Jonathan the Talking Goose. I think I hear him coming now. If you just wait a minute, maybe. Here he comes now, sure enough. Here comes Jonathan the Talking Goose. Right, well. You knew all the time that I was wanting you up here. And how you feeling today? How you feeling today? You know how close you are to me? You're just about 4 inches away from my face. And you're talking goose language. And that's the boy. That's the boy. And you're all alone, and nobody comes to see you. But we got a photographer here from Regina today. Tell me, can you talk anything besides goose language? Can you talk French? Can you parlez-vous français? Parlez-vous français? Oh, there's the other fella calling you down at the lake. Isn't it a lovely day today? I guess. How about dressing up a little and show us how you dress up in the mornings? Come on, preen your feather just a little bit and show us how you dress up in the morning. I'm not going to say anymore. I'm just going to sit and watch you now for a little while.
During the past 30 years, residents of the town of Abernethy, Saskatchewan, have become used to the sight of Canada geese circling low overhead and landing near the edge of town. Their presence is due to the work of Ralph Stueck, farmer, naturalist, filmmaker, and lecturer. To several generations of school children, he is known affectionately as Uncle Ralph. In 1882, Conrad and Harriett Stueck moved from Ontario to the Abernethy area with the first wave of settlers. They had 8 children. The 7th, born in 1893, was christened Ralph Prescott Stueck. From an early age, he displayed an unusual fascination with wildlife and the prairie landscape, often to the detriment of his formal education.
It was my first recollection of going to school. We had to walk 2 miles across the prairies, and we generally took the 24th of May for the day that you discarded your boots and stockings for the season. Therefore, we walked to school every morning in our bare feet. Many times I remember of going over what we call the big hill that was just a quarter of a mile from the school. And on this hill, the sandhill crane and the whooping crane were migrating, and this was one of their calling off spots. Also on this hill, I can remember my first experience of seeing the dance of the pinnated grouse. Many a time, instead of going on to school, I laid on this hill and watched the pinnated grouse. And instead of getting to school at 9 o'clock, I would get there at 9:30, and of course get a good scolding from the teacher, but also learned out of a school that she wasn't learning out of. That was the school of nature. Going to school to me was harder to do than manual labor. I was never able to read a book right through on account of my eyes would get sore, and some way or another the teacher didn't know this, and she would say, Ralph Stueck, you would learn more if you stayed at home because you're looking out to the window all the time. I can think of the school door being open, and 2 or 3 gophers would come into the school and right in amongst the desks, and about this time the teacher was on top of the desk, and another chap and I had to catch the gopher and see that he got outside. Of course, we didn't catch him any sooner than we had to. We'd chase him around the school to see just what the teacher would do.
In 1912, the University of Saskatchewan opened its new agricultural college. Among the first students were 4 boys from Abernethy, including Ralph Stueck. He distinguished himself as an athlete on the agriculture hockey team and went on to play on the all-star university team. In the difficult years as a novice farmer, his athletic ability often made the difference between success and financial disaster. Prize money from baseball tournaments was a welcome supplement to the meager income of a dryland farm. Following graduation from the agricultural college, Ralph Stueck moved to the banks of the South Saskatchewan River near Macrorie. There he took over the operation of a poor dryland farm owned by an uncle.
Horses, of course, were the thing of the day. In the morning, all you had to do was roll out about 4 o'clock in the morning and go down and feed the horses, harness them, and curry them. And that generally took an hour to harness 4 horses. A little later on, we got to 6 horses, and a little later on, we got to 8 horses, and sometimes 10 and 12, which took a real man to harness 8 and 10 and 12 horses in the morning and get in time for breakfast. You only went 10 hours, and you had to hold up because the horses were tired, and that's all they could stand day after day. Today is a different story. You buy a very large tractor that costs about $30,000 to $50,000 with a cab on it and a radio in it and a cooler, and you go out there and you call it farming. To me, it doesn't hold a candle to the homesteaders that broke up this country and depended entirely on the horse for power. Farming to me is a very wonderful occupation. I can't think of any finer place to raise a family that they will be practical and see nature and to grow up with a healthy body than right on the farm. After farming in the dry belt for a while, it was quite a relief to come back here to Abernethy and find that you could grow crop partner every other year or every year. Kerry Farm belongs to my son at the present time, but I spent some 25 years, the best part of my life, at Kerry Farm. The old fellow that homesteaded here built the house out of stone, and it's standing there today, built in 1897. This was the first post office in Abernethy. In one room in that house, the mail was received once a week in the early part of the century and before the century. Kerry Farm was named after the Kerry dancers in Ireland by my first wife. And I farmed there for a good number of years, and the children grew up. My boy Hugh was going to get married, so I talked it over with my wife, and we decided to move into Abernethy. And I wanted to take my goose sanctuary along with me, of course, but we just wondered if it would work to move a goose sanctuary into the middle of a little town. So I looked the town over and found an old slough that nobody wanted. So I went to the town council and bought 7 lots. The position we're in now, we call it Sleepy Hollow. After listening to Jack Miner's lecture many years ago, I made up my mind that I would like to start a goose sanctuary of my own. He told me it could be done. And on a hunting trip, we tip-winged 3 lovely birds, and I kept them separately and started out a goose sanctuary. My flock increased here till I had around 75 Canada geese. And many years ago, I had a wild gander come in and mate with one of my geese in the backyard here. And that is the original pair, Hiawatha and Queenie, that I sent into Regina to Mr. Fred Bard at the museum to start Wascana Wildlife Flock of Geese. As I grow older, I find I cannot look after as many subjects as I used to. And with the help of my good wife, Mary Kay, we still look after a flock of geese.
Among the hundreds of geese that came and went from the Sleepy Hollow flock were several that were especially memorable. Jonathan, the first talking goose. Jacob and Rachel, a pair of blue geese, and a very tame pair of Canadas named Maggie and Jigs.
Maggie and Jigs were raised with the handling of children, and they seemed to know that human beings were all right, that they would not be molested. You could lift Maggie off the nest and show the eggs. Maggie and Jigs were very fond of school children. When they would come in, they could actually pet Maggie and Jigs. And that maybe was what made them so adaptable to Sleepy Hollow and to be my favorites of all the geese that I ever owned. I had one pair of blue geese, a nest here. Jacob and Rachel had their own little island, and one year I had 4 little goslings, 2 mouse-colored ones and 2 white ones. It seems the blue goose and the snow goose are related. They can come either snow goose or blue goose. It so happened that my wife had taken a picture of Jonathan the talking goose with a movie camera of the goose actually talking into my ear. So I took one frame from a 16 millimeter movie film, and I made it into a calling card. This calling card I have given away all over the world. When the school children behave properly, I promise them a picture of Jonathan the talking goose. As soon as they get their picture, also promise me that they will do 2 good deeds every day for someone else in the world, and they must also call me Uncle Ralph. It seems to do something to a child to teach him that God has given you 5 senses. You can hear, you can see, you can smell, you can taste, and you can touch. Those 5 senses are very important if you use them to the extent that they can be used. If you teach a child to observe nature with his 5 senses, he can educate himself to a great extent. This is why I established Sleepy Hollow here in Abernethy, and many a child come in and spent an hour or so just looking at things that they didn't see otherwise, and talking about nature. And from then on, they went out and did things on their own. This afternoon, I would kind of like to tell you the origin of the museum that you're now looking at. It's here in the basement at Sleepy Hollow, and throughout the years, many schools and many neighbors and people from abroad have visited this museum. It was started when I was a boy of 12 years old. I learned to do taxidermy from a Presbyterian minister. He must have been a right good fellow, because he took some of us boys in and taught us things that lasted a lifetime. And as you see the museum here, It did take me a lifetime, some 64 to 70 years, to build this museum, and I'm still building it. Many times throughout the summer, the schools call here, and they land in here with maybe 20 or 30 in a bus, and we get them all down into the museum here, and I explain little things to them that they should know about our province. One thing, for instance, is the bird emblem of our province. It's the sharp-tailed grouse, and it's named sharp-tailed grouse from its very sharp tail here. There are 5 different kinds of grouse in Saskatchewan, but we chose the sharp-tailed grouse for our emblem. Many years ago, we had another grouse that looked very much like the sharp-tailed grouse. It is now extinct on the prairies, but this grouse is called the pinnated grouse by the 2 pinnates on the side of its neck here. During the dancing period, or the mating dance, there are 2 oranges one on either side of the neck that blow up like a balloon. And there's a peculiar noise accompanied to this dance. Boom, 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 boom. In order to get this dance on film, a few years ago I had to go clear through to the state of Wisconsin, because they are now extinct on the prairies. We're now about to show you a film that I'm very proud of. It's called Churchill, Gateway to a New World of Commerce. This picture was taken in the port of Churchill, and an excursion train of some 270 people went on this train to Churchill in the year 1954. And eventually I went out to spear a white whale with 2 Eskimos.
The making and showing of nature films dominated the early years of Ralph Stueck's retirement. Through the medium of lecture films, he shared his knowledge and experiences with audiences the length and breadth of the prairies and beyond. Each year he made a new film, gave dozens of lectures, and traveled thousands of miles. Except for an occasional gift to cover traveling expenses, this work was done entirely out of his own pocket.
North country of how they live in the north. But when the excursion started out and the great train come in with 16 cars, the conductor said, "All aboard." Going to university in 1912, I had just an ordinary box camera, and knew little or nothing of photography, but very interested in getting different subjects at the university in the way of cattle and hogs and poultry and so forth. But anyway, later on, the first real interest that I think that made part of my life taking pictures of nature was there was a open crane landed here at Abernethy. This was one of the first times that I had ever used a movie camera, and I found it so fascinating that you could photograph an animal in movement rather than just in a still picture, that I bought myself a 16 millimeter Bolex. And from then on, I started taking pictures. This was more or less a hobby. When you leave the farm, an old farmer finds himself twiddling his thumbs when he comes into town and he has nothing to do. And I found this a good medium to keep the mind busy and something of importance to share with somebody else. And I also found that nature was one of the poorest subjects that had been taught in the schools. The school teacher knew little or nothing about nature and said little or nothing to the children of conservation. In many cases, I went to little towns 2 and 3 times. The third time, the hall would be so full that there wasn't seating room anymore, just to see a wildlife nature picture. And you notice the Eskimo with his spear, there she goes, and he throws throws out the barrel, and the whale is pulling the boat around now, and the Eskimo brings him in and ties him up to the boat. This is the shore of the Hudson Bay, and the Eskimo lives along here, and his dogs were of the best. This is Lena the lemming that I got from a little Eskimo boy. She was the cutest animal I've ever had anything to do with. You could handle her with your bare hands. She would not bite you. I had Lena the lemming and her 3 baby young ones for 3 or 4 months after coming home from the trip to Churchill.
Lena the lemming was only one of many wild animals that were brought home to Sleepy Hollow for study and photography. In a small basement room, Ralph Stueck filmed his tamed captives, bringing them closer to his audiences than would ever have been possible in the wild. Rare and secretive animals like the kangaroo rat were unknown to most people, but through film they became familiar. Even the mysteries of hibernation came under the eye of his camera and somehow became less mysterious for young audiences. Through all of his work, Ralph Stueck's chief aim was to encourage and support the natural interest that children have in living things. He traveled from school to school with projector, films, and a supply of calling cards.
I think that we should live with nature, and we should teach each child that this is a very valuable part of life, that if we destroy the birds and the animals and the flowers and the water, pollute the water, well, we're just in turn doing this against ourselves, not against anybody else. Children's minds are still in the process of development. They're not like an adult's mind, settled on certain questions and you cannot change their mind. A child's mind is quite pliable. If you show them something in the way of flowers or nature or birds nesting or just general outdoor habitat, he soon begins to learn for himself. The reason that you go to nature for knowledge is that you find the hard-boiled way of teaching is not in tune with the way you see it. Even today, I cannot read a book any more than an hour's time. I have to lay the book down. My head starts going around. And at school, the same thing happened. When I was given history to read, grammar to read, geography, it seemed to bother me. But outside, where I could see distances of 10 to 15 miles, I was learning something that you didn't learn inside of that 4 walls with a ruler waiting for it to paddle your hands.
The walls of Sleepy Hollow Museum are hung with the mementos and rewards of a long career in conservation work. Ralph Stueck's films won first prize in the amateur class of the first 2 competitions of the Yorkton Film Festival. In 1964, he traveled to Halifax to receive the Julian Crandall Conservation Trophy from the Canadian Tourism Association. In that same year, he received his greatest honor when an island in Lac La Ronge was named Stueck Island. In a memorable trip that autumn, he assisted his old friend, Game Commissioner Ernie Painter, as a plaque was installed on the island.
never forget the last words of Ernie Painter. He said, "Ralph, of all my boyhood pleasures and all the hunting trips I've ever been on, this tops them all. This is a heavenly scene." And he said, "Look," he says, "if we don't meet here on this island, we'll meet hereafter." I've often thought of that now that I'm growing older. If we don't meet here, we'll meet hereafter.
I'll tell you something that I really believe in, and that all people should enjoy nature. Nature is part of your life. If you're going through this world without seeing the birds and the bees and the wild geese and the flowers, you're just missing a whole lot. That's what I think, don't you? I think this is part of life, that we should enjoy the universe that God made for you and I. And if you got a pet goose, well, why not? Or a pet cat, or a pet dog. Some of them even have a pet skunk, you know that? We don't keep skunks around here, though. No, sirree, we don't keep skunks around here, nor rats either. That's just for the other fella to keep. I like a talking goose about as good as anything. Don't you think so? Yeah, we're pretty good pals. We've been here for about 18, 19 years now, haven't we? That's quite a long time to be together, to understand each other. Okay? Okay. So say we all. That's it. The verdict of the jury, so say we all.